land belongs to our Heavenly Father, and we calculate to plow and plant it. You can imagine within months, disputes arose between the pioneers and the Shoshone over the land and what my grandmother called the payment of rent. Sagwich's life was now going to get complicated. Over the next few years, as more and more saints arrived to that beautiful place, good land was now becoming scarce. It was then that Brigham Young sent scouts north to the Cache Valley where I live today. That one act, though, would have a devastating effect on my people. In those early days, those early saints in the Cache Valley referred to Sagwich and his people as the friendly ones. As resources began to become scarce, those same saints referred to my people as thieves and beggars, which was probably true from their perspective. The irony, though, in that for me is that the saints themselves had suffered so much hate and injustice on their trek across his country. It's hard for me to believe that they could be found guilty of doing the same thing to my people. Peter Mon, who was now the area authority in the Cache Valley, said this: with extraordinarily good luck, the volunteers, California volunteers, will completely wipe them out. We wish this community rid of all such parties. And if Colonel Connor can be successful in reaching that bastard class of humans who play with the lives of the peaceable and the law-abiding citizens in this way, we shall be pleased to acknowledge our obligations. So with this development, the use of the California and Oregon trails that cut through the heart of Shoshone land, I think my people had three options: beg for food, starve, or steal. I'm sure they did all three. In early January, the saints living in Cache Valley began writing letters to Salt Lake City for someone to come put an end to the Indian depredations. Arrest warrants were issued for Chief Pocatello, Sagwich, and Bear Hunter. Colonel Patrick Edward Connor and his men at Camp Douglas, Utah, were now mustered into service. A Mormon scout named Porter Rockwell led Connor and his men just north of Logan, Utah today, near Preston, Idaho, where Battle Creek meets Bo Ogai. Sagwich, being an early riser, got up as usual on the morning of the 29th. He left his teepee and surveyed the area around his camp. The hills to the southeast appeared to be covered in a steaming mist. The mist started to lower down the hill, and Sagwich realized what was taking place. The troops from Camp Douglas had arrived. He started calling to his village to wake up and to gather whatever they could find to fight with. Some of our women were picking up their woven winnowing pans to use them for shields. Without so much as asking for the guilty parties, Connor and his men began to fire their rifles and sidearms at my people. But what are arrows compared to the rifles of the soldiers? The soldiers massacred men, women, and children. My grandmother said our people were being slaughtered like wild rabbits. The massacre started early in the morning and lasted till mid-afternoon. The Bear River, which was slightly frozen earlier, was now starting to flow. Many of our people were now jumping into this river to try to escape. The blazing white snow was now brilliant red with blood. The willow trees that were used as hiding places were bent down as if in defeat. Many of our women were jumping into the river with their young children to try to escape. Almost all of them died. One woman named Angie Chi told of being chased by the soldiers. Angie Chi was a brand new mom. She had a brand new newborn. She jumped into the river You might ask yourself, how could she jump into this cold river and survive? Because of the many hot springs that are along the river. She jumped in where there was a hot spring, swam under an overhanging bank where there was a pocket of air for safety. When she got there, she found herself there with 10 other women who'd had the same idea. It was then it happened. Angie Chi's newborn baby started to cry. They could hear the soldiers just above their head, wondering where they'd gone. Angie Chi lived to be more than 100 years old, and she often told and retold this story to the young children at Washakie. She told the children of being in that water, tending the 7 bullet wounds that she'd already received to her body, and telling the children that she had to drown her own baby to make sure it didn't give up the location of the other people. The cruelest killing, though, was that of Bear Hunter. They knew that he was a leader. The soldiers shot him, stabbed him, tortured him. But through all of that, the old chief wouldn't die or wouldn't even cry out for mercy. Because of that, they became angry and frustrated. One of the military men took his rifle and his bayonet, stepped to a burning campfire, and heated that bayonet until it was glowing red. And then he ran that piece of metal through that chief's head from ear to ear. Bear Hunter went to his grave a man of honor, and he left behind a wife and many small children. At the end of the massacre, Connor allowed a handful of Mormons to walk the field. James Martineau, in his journal, he wrote, "I was sickened by what I saw." He said that many of the squaws were killed because they would not lie down and submit to be ravished by the soldiers. He later told Peter Mon of sickening accounts of inhuman acts by the soldiers. He said after the Indians had been routed, they killed almost all of the wounded by hitting them in the head with an axe. The next morning, at Brigham Young's request, Mormons William Head, William Hull, and William Nelson went to the site looking for survivors. Hull later recorded in his journal, "We drove our sleighs as far as the river. The first sight to greet us was an old Indian walking, head bowed, lamenting the dead. He didn't speak to us, and he soon left, walking towards the north." And then William Hull said this, "Never will I forget the scene. Dead bodies were everywhere. I counted 8 deep in one place, and in many places there were 3 to 5 deep. All in all, the 3 of us independently counted more than 450 dead. 2/3 of that number being women and children." And then he said this, he said, "We found 2 little boys and 1 little girl who looked to be about the age of 3. The little girl was badly wounded, having received 8 bullet wounds to her tiny body. We took them on our sleighs back home and made them as comfortable as possible." Sagwitch survived, but he must have been thinking about and realized that he was now living in 2 different worlds. One group made their wishes and dreams come true by making themselves the conqueror at the expense of a defenseless people who only wanted to be left alone. One group wanted the land. They wanted everything. Ralph Smith, an area Franklin settler, summed up the sentiments of the local saints when he said this, "We all looked upon the massacre as gruesome, but necessary," and added, "The work of Patrick Edward Connor and his California volunteers was nothing less than an intervention from our Heavenly Father." Henry Ballard, bishop of the Logan First Ward, said, "This put a quietus upon the Indians. The Lord raised up his foe in Colonel Connor to punish them without us having to do it." And then he said, "We had bore a great deal from them, and yet we had been feeding them. And yet some of the wicked spirits among them would stir up trouble against us." And finally, in a letter dated February 4th, from Peter Mon to Brigham Young, Mon said, "I fill my skirts rid of their blood. They rejected the way of life and salvation, which had been pointed out to them from time to time. And thus they have perished, relying upon their own strength and wisdom." Just north of Preston, Idaho, today, you'll find an old monument on the side of the road. This monument was erected in 1932 by the people of Franklin County. It was meant to tell the story of the events of that fateful day. The whole community came together to share their histories and reminisce and tell stories. What the monument really accomplished for me is that it gives people a reason to forget. A monument strips us of our obligation to find out for ourselves what actually took place. And that monument tells us how it wants the past to be remembered. You see, humans have great memories for what we want to remember. In commemorating something ugly like this, the battle, you tend to forget the uglier parts of history, and you only focus on the heroism of the soldier and the saint. That's the kind of Daughters of Utah Pioneers monument that exists there today. But that narrative now becomes the story. It's not a story about my people and those lives that were lost. It becomes a story about the brave soldiers and the wonderful pioneer women who took care of them. In constructing a monument like this, you firm up memory and you create a false history. You decide. The plaque on the monument reads, "Attacks by the Indians on the peaceful inhabitants in this vicinity led to the final battle here on January 29th in 1863. The conflict occurred in deep snow and bitter cold. Scores of wounded soldiers were taken from the battlefield to the Latter-day Saint community of Franklin. Here, pioneer women, trained through trials and necessities of frontier living, accepted the responsibility of caring for the wounded until they could be removed to Camp Douglas, Utah. Oh, and by the way, 2 Indian women found alive after the encounter were given homes in Franklin." So my question to you is that really what happened? The problem with that narrative, for me among many, is that it gives us one point of view from one generation's perspective 69 years after the actual event. It's like a view from a window that has been carefully placed to exclude a whole quadrant of a beautiful landscape. You only get to see what they want you to see. It reinforces the view that Indians were savages. It reinforces the view that violence on the frontier, even in our Mormon communities, was necessary for the survival of Mormon communities. And it showed what the consequences would be if both groups tried to share the same space. In May, I met a group of 4th graders at the monument. Next to the monument is a tree, a large mature tree where people hang offerings in the tree. I don't know why they leave them, but they leave dream catchers and other things to commemorate what happened. One day, me and 100 4th graders were looking at this honor tree, and a young boy noticed a mirror hanging in the tree, and he said, "Look, I see a mirror hanging in the tree. What do you think that means? I frantically tried to think about what a mirror might mean to come up with a wonderful answer. And thank goodness, a little girl standing next to me bailed me out. And she said, I know what it means. I said, what do you think it means? And she said, that mirror is here to remind us that we did this. I'll tell you, the hair on my head stood up, and I got chills, and I looked at the teacher and thought, oh my goodness, I've been taught by a fourth grader today. What if the plaque on that monument had been written from the Shoshone perspective? Would it have said the same thing? Maybe it would have said something like this. The massacre of the Northwestern Shoshones occurred in this vicinity on January 29th in 1863. Patrick Edward Connor and his California volunteers attacked a sleeping Indian village in the early morning hours of the day. The soldiers shot, raped, bludgeoned, and bayoneted several hundred men, women, and children to their death. The Indians fought back with the limited weapons available to them, but the band was all but annihilated. Which version of the massacre is correct? The answer will lie in your perspective. The events that took place on that cold January morning have long been forgotten by most. Maybe guilt or remorse has silenced all those who one day may have wanted to know the truth. But I hope there's a new generation that has a desire to listen and to learn. And it's not because we're looking to have things made right. We're not. But I believe that those who died at Bear River that day have a God-given right to be heard. Their voice speaks to me from the dust. We remember and we honor the past because it allows us to move on and heal and succeed in the future. Someone once told me, never let your past experiences harm your future. Your past cannot be altered, and your future doesn't deserve the punishment. I am grateful that past negative experiences didn't alter Chief Sagwich's future, because as his direct descendant, it would have altered mine. I believe that the most successful Native Americans today are those who can best balance culture and change. We honor our culture. We honor those who have gone before. They are important to us. We honor them in their traditions, but we live in an ever-changing world, and it's my job to make sure that our youth are prepared to change with it. The massacre at Boa Ogai has taught me many lessons over the period of my life. It's taught me that bad things happen to people. How we respond to those events, though, will determine our character and who we become. It has taught me to offer unconditional forgiveness, but it doesn't mean we need to forget. It has taught me that as we preserve history, it's important that all views are represented and respected. And it has taught me that everyone has a story worthy of being told. What is your story going to be? Because your story is equally as important as mine. And it's taught me that the souls of my ancestors peer out from behind my mask of skin, and that through my memories, they get to live again. Tell me a fact, and I will learn. Tell me a truth, and I will believe. But tell me a story, that will live in my heart forever. Ultimately, the story of Bear River is our story. And in some ways, I hope you can respect the story that we want to have told, as well as recognize your role in that story. You see, history doesn't always affirm us. Sometimes history challenges us. to think about an uglier past that we'd rather not have. But you know what? That's really the power and the benefit of history. It connects us to the past. It connects us to our humanity. And it connects us to our inhumanity. But it always offers us a way to move forward. Especially in a circumstance like this, with the Shoshone people, to move forward in a way that connects us not in the prettiest of ways, but to move forward to what I call a new relationship. It's a 21st century relationship based on respect. Respect for the truth and what happened in that past moment. Then, and only then, do you get the possibility for reconciliation. But how do we make reconciliation possible in such a divided world where one mindset with Western values says that I have rights. You don't tell me what to do. I have rights. Versus an indigenous mindset that says I have obligations. I have obligations to the past, present, and future. And I have obligations to my community. One day a hunter brought home a sizable kill, far too much to be eaten by his family. A mountain man nearby asked this hunter how he was going to store the excess, because storing and drying technologies were well known. The hunter looked at the mountain man puzzled and said, "Store the excess, why would I do that?" Instead, the hunter set out an invitation for the whole village to come together and enjoy a great feast. Soon, they were all gathered around his fire. They danced and sang and ate until every last morsel was consumed. Well, this really puzzled the mountain man further, who again approached the hunter that night and said, "Given the uncertainty of fresh meat in the forest, why didn't you just save the meat for your family for future use?" The hunter looked at the mountain man again and said, "Store the meat? I store the meat in the belly of my brother." As we become successful by today's standards, can I make one suggestion? I hope that your status in this life will be determined by not how much you accumulate, but by how much you give away. And then show gratitude for what you received. Gratitude is so much more than a polite thank you. It's a thread that connects us into a deep relationship, simultaneously physical and spiritual, as our bodies are fed and our spirits are nourished with a sense of belonging, which is the most vital of foods. Gratitude creates a sense of abundance, the knowing that you have enough of what you need. In that climate of sufficiency, our hunger for more goes away, and we only take what we need in respect of the generosity of the giver. Robin Wall Kimmerer said that. Wealth should always be understood as having enough to share, and the practice of dealing with abundance should be to give it away. Take a look around you today. We're as varied and as colorful as a beautiful field of wildflowers, all bringing with us our each individual characteristics and traits. As you look around, I hope you can truly see each other for who you are. We need to be able to see through each other's eyes. When that happens, the possibilities are endless. The differences that we all bring to the table can be the strengths that we all draw from each other. Our life has brought us knowledge. Knowledge brings understanding. And greater understanding brings openness to seeing other ways of seeing and being. Don't ever be afraid to forge a new path. It's important to remember that nobody is you, and that is your superpower. Be the one who celebrates the different colors of our skins and embraces the opportunities that gives us to learn from each other. Be the one who breaks the cycle. If you were ever judged wrongly, choose to be understanding. If you were ever rejected, choose acceptance. If you were ever shamed, be the one who chooses compassion. Be the person you needed when things didn't go well and you were hurting, and not the person that hurt you. And always, always, instead of holding on to a grudge, be the first one to forgive. I think about the values of my native people and the lessons of life that they can teach us. I believe they'd want all of us to live as one, to cherish our likenesses but celebrate the heck out of our differences, to honor our stewardship for this earth and all things on it and the sky above it. They would tell us to have gratitude for the things that we have, for those who made the trails for us to follow. They would tell us to have reverence in our hearts. They would tell us to spread the kind of love that awakens the soul, that makes each one of us reach for more, that plants the fire in our hearts and brings peace to our minds. That's the kind of love this world needs today. Love, kindness, forgiveness, acceptance. I see you. I hear you. I accept you for who you are. Those affirmations and many more like them are what I like to call medicine words. I hope we can speak medicine words to those people around us, but especially to our young people. Words that bless, empower, and inspire. When we speak medicine words to each other, we build unity, and we strengthen our culture and our community and our nation. One day, a little girl asked me, looked me dead in the eye and asked me how I got to be the chief. And I told her this. When a young Shoshone boy or girl does an act of kindness or service, the chief and the tribe would give that boy or girl an eagle feather. I then said to the little girl, what would happen if that boy or girl kept doing kind things and serving? She said, well, they would get more eagle feathers. And I said, what if that boy or girl kept doing kind things for everyone until they became an adult? What do you think would happen? And she said, well, by then, they would have so many eagle feathers. And I said, you're right. I said, then one day when the chief gets ready to die, and the chief is always the leader until he dies, or she dies, he would call everyone together, and he would say, I'm about to meet my maker. I need to select a new chief. I want all of you to pull out your eagle feathers and then show them to me. And it was the person that had the most eagle feathers would be the new chief. You see, the chief isn't the bravest or the strongest or the toughest. The chief is always the one who led a life of service and kindness to those around them or her. So, my admonition to you is, go be a chief. Be a good sibling. Be a good student. Be a good friend. Express gratitude for those around you. Be the kind of person that people want to be with. In this way, you're not going to be a Shoshone chief, but you will become a leader in your community. Leadership that's not rooted in power and authority, but in service and wisdom. In 2018, our tribe purchased all of the Bear River Massacre site, 700 acres of that sacred place. Not only is it important to tell the story of the people, It's equally as important to tell the story of the land, and since that time we've been doing land restoration work on the site. Healing begins when you bring people together. Where do you begin? How do you address cultural and environmental injustices that have taken place forever? You start by talking. You start by getting together and collaborating. I love the prophecy of Chief Crazy Horse, who I believe was a prophet, who I believe could see our day and time, when he said this: "Upon suffering beyond suffering, the Red Nation shall rise again, and it will be a blessing to a sick world, a world filled with broken promises, selfishness, and separations, a world longing for light again. I see a time of 7 generations when all the colors of mankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole earth will become one circle again. In that day, there will be those among my native people who will carry this knowledge, an understanding of unity among all living things. And the young white ones will come to those of my people and ask for this wisdom. I salute the light in your eyes, where the whole universe dwells. For when you are at the center within you, and I am in that place within me, we shall be as one." I think the words of Crazy Horse are prophetic. Like many Native American leaders who came before, and many Native American leaders who will come again. Do you know the Iroquois Nation doesn't make any decisions without considering what effects that decision would have on 7 generations ahead? Think about the implications for our future if our leaders decided to govern that way. In closing, let me share just one more story with you. In late summer, I loved getting into my grandmother's Oldsmobile and taking what I thought was the longest car ride in the world. In reality, it was probably 40 minutes from Clearfield to the Cache Valley where I live today. The car had come to a stop, and she'd go to the trunk and pull out a woven willow basket that had been stained dark purple. I knew then that we were there to harvest choke cherries, something that our people had done for centuries. She taught me what signs to look for when the berries were ripe. After we offered a prayer to our Creator, to Mother Earth, and to the berries themselves, we began picking berries with such care that we wouldn't even harm a leaf on a tree. She taught me the importance of sharing those berries with those in need or with those who could not make it to the mountain that day. And she taught me the importance of sharing those berries for future use. As I think back on that experience, those berries are much like our life today. As we all go through different experiences and lessons of life, are we gathering what our parents and teachers and friends and enemies have been teaching us? Are you gathering that knowledge, even from those who are unkind? And are you putting those knowledge in your basket? Be attentive. Listen with all your mind and soul. Sometimes we're all going to go through hard things, but with great care, I hope you will one day take out those berries of knowledge and use them. You should cherish them. And when one day when someone is in need, a friend, going through a challenge, struggling mentally, what are you going to do? How are you going to use those berries of knowledge to help someone in need? I hope then you will be able to pull out those berries of knowledge. and use them for someone who's struggling in life, because we all struggle in life. I have great hope for your generation. We need you more than any other time. You've been saved for this day. We need you. If you're struggling, reach out to a friend. But we need all of you to be a voice for good, to be a voice for those who have never had a voice before, the marginalized, those people that have never had a seat at the table. You've got to give them a voice. I'm grateful for the opportunity that Snow College has given me to come and share just a few minutes and a few of the stories that I've heard my whole life. I hope that we can take those and put them into a daily use and use them for someone that might be in need. So thank you very much for having me. Thanks.